Roth conference. My name is Zekba Jala. I am a senior research analyst on the biotech team, and I will be the moderator for this panel on therapies and vaccines in the fight against COVID. A pretty relevant topic, but before we get into the questions, to help orient folks listening in that may not be as familiar with each company, I'll first ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, their companies, and at this time, you can provide any necessary disclosures that you may have. Okay, let's start with Jay and then.
Which order we're going?
Yeah, Jay and then Daniel and then Shankar.
Okay, thank you. So thanks for the opportunity to join the panel today. So I'm Jay Lula, I'm from Enanta Pharmaceuticals. And before I begin, I will make a disclaimer. We could be making some forward-looking statements today, and for a summary of the risks associated with these statements, please see our filings on sec.gov and on our website. So Enanta is a company that's focused on liver disease and virology, or sometimes liver disease and virology, where they intersect. Maybe best known in the area of hepatitis C. We also work on hepatitis B, but we've recently, over the last several years, built out a program in human respiratory virus treatments, starting with RSV and human metapneumo, and more recently, SARS-CoV-2.
Thanks, Jay. And then Daniel?
Yeah, thank you for giving us the opportunity to present here and to discuss in this exciting meeting. And maybe just a background myself, Daniel Fitz, CEO of Immunic, biotech company focusing on developing new innovative oral drugs for treating chronic inflammation and autoimmune diseases, and with an underlying quite interesting mechanism. And I think why we are here today on this panel is that we identified that our lead program, 838, with its mode of action, has a broad spectrum antiviral activity on top of its effect against overshooting immune cells. And therefore, we also quickly tested activity against SARS-CoV-2 and performed a phase 2 clinical trial in COVID-19. And that's a good addition to the oral drug on chronic inflammation autoimmune story.
Thanks, Daniel. Shankar?
Thank you. Thank you, Zigba, for inviting us. Once again, Ocugen is known as a gene therapy company. We're focused on developing gene therapies to cure blindness diseases. When the COVID started, we have a lot of expertise in vaccines, and we thought we could bring this differentiated vaccine to US market because of the great need. And so we are working on a COVID-19 vaccine. We're trying to bring it to the US market shortly.
Thank you. So we'll ask some additional questions about that. But just to begin, we have a whole list here. I'll start with Jay Lulai, Dr. Jay Lulai. Jay, Enanta has established a name for itself in the biology space, as you've mentioned, with your work with HCV, and you have an antiviral program in discovery phase for COVID-19. Any comments on the trends you're seeing in the rise and fall in the number of COVID cases and what that could mean for your program as well?
Sure. So there has been a rise and a fall, and then a rise again, as often happens with these viruses. Fortunately, the signs are looking very good in terms of the trends that have been happening of late. I think it's a combination of probably seasonality starting to creep in a positive way. Clearly, the positive role of vaccination, I think, is starting to be seen, as well as, we're starting to see probably the benefits of some population immunization that had already occurred, maybe more vastly and unknowingly than we had thought. So many more people probably infected than we thought, a lot in the United States. And that chips in as well as helping. I think one of the cautionary signs, though, is that just when you think things are getting a little better, then a variant will pop up here or there. And so it's going to be a little bit of a noisy dampening of this thing, over time as different populations in different territories that have been variously vaccinated or variously exposed encounter one of many different variants. And so, but generally, the trends are going in the right direction, and that's a good sign. I think what the future holds for many quarters after this is one of the big questions, and I'm sure we'll debate that today.
Yeah, I'm actually going to put you on the spot and have you make some of your own predictions. But I think it's just because I've heard you comment on your RSV program efforts. Very interestingly, you've noted delays in uptaking cases. So just a pushing of the number of cases, not a total obliviation of not totally getting rid of the RSV cases, but you're just kind of pushing them further along. So just kind of wondering, if you think something like that could be happening with COVID, and are we likely to just see COVID occur, out of season, just multiple time points during the course of the year?
Yeah, so maybe just starting with the front part of that question. So I think just for some people who may be less familiar with what you're referring to, we do a lot of clinical trials in RSV, which is another important respiratory pathogen for which there are no approved treatments. And one of the things that we saw with the SARS-CoV-2 situation emerging globally was that all the mitigation measures that people had been taking, whether it was travel bans or lockdowns or social distancing or mask wearing or school closures, all of these things are very helpful in terms of, trying to corral an emergent virus and keep it somewhat under control. But those measures also were very effective in terms of the normal seasonality of influenza, and also respiratory syncytial virus and human metapneumovirus, for that matter, another one that we work on. But one of the interesting things happened in the Southern Hemisphere just a couple of months ago as they were heading into the summer season. They started letting their guard down a little bit in a populous region in Australia. And they suddenly saw this massive resurgence of respiratory syncytial virus. In fact, the spike was higher than a normal year, and it was completely frame shifted with regards to seasonality. It was happening in the summertime, which is a time when RSV almost never happens in that territory. So the question is, well, what about COVID? Could you start to see that sort of thing? I think before you see that sort of thing in COVID, we'll probably start to see that sort of thing more broadly in RSV as we, hopefully get into a better spot with COVID and start relaxing some of the measures that are important for controlling COVID. We may see, and some people are predicting, that you could see epidemic influenza, you could see epidemic RSV, and it's a frustrating situation. So I think we don't know enough about the seasonality quite yet of COVID in an era where we should have reasonable vaccines and reasonable rates of vaccination. So I think we need to kind of see how it settles, to a steady state, what the measures are. But clearly, the more you mask up and then you expose yourself, if you haven't been properly vaccinated or otherwise exposed, and this is where variants can come in, you're going to be vulnerable. I mean, we saw people vulnerable in July, which is not a time for respiratory viruses. It's because they didn't have any sort of immunity, to this. So I think it's a little early to know what will happen with COVID down the line, but it could fall into place with the rest of the endemic respiratory viruses, which is what I would expect to happen: RSV, influenza, human metapneumo, and we'll have a new one, to worry about, COVID.
Thanks, Jay. And so in addition to concerns about, how COVID might play out in terms of its seasonality. I think another thing you mentioned, and we know it's, concerns about mutants. So can you talk a little bit about, how you guys are thinking about that? And then, for your individual programs that you're working on, are they likely to be effective against these mutants that are showing up? So again, we'll just go in the same order, starting with Ocugen and then Daniel and then Jay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're seeing the emergence of these variants, right? I think initial studies clearly showed, starting from UK to Brazil to South Africa, it's very concerning. In fact, New York, yesterday, I was reading A484K, which is pretty similar to, Brazilian strain, and it's emerging. It's more than 20%. That's widely spreading. I think people have to be concerned about this variant, So once again, that's going to happen, and so that's where we come in. The 3 vaccines which are in the U.S. and they're based on spike protein. Okay, and when you have the mutation of the spike, and that's going to have impact. This is all mutating, and you got variants coming up, and eventually you will have a escape. There's a possibility and potential, right? And so what we have is a whole virion-based, a whole virus, and it has got adjuvants which actually boost the cellular-mediated responses, and it's a broad spectrum antigenic response as well as epitopes, multi-epitope and multi-antigen. That's the way we believe is to control and minimize the viral escape. That's needed. And so if we can protect people with that, and if you can vaccinate, majority of the population, you can have the control of the pandemic. That's very important. Mm-hmm. And number 2, current vaccines, I think the variants are going to continue to emerge, and people have to really think about, take a step back and see how you're going to treat them, because you really have to control the pandemic. That's the number 1 focus. It's not about coming with the boosters and keep vaccinating every 6 months. Our vaccination rates are improving, but we're still way behind. Right? At the end of last month, they had less than 10% of Americans. We all, in this country, vaccination rates, it's growing up. It's doing much better now, but it's still a major issue one has to address. Number 2, we also have to take care of the kids. I think most of the focus is on adults right now, and that's a big thing I think we have to work on. Again, our vaccine, we have data 12 plus age group. Currently 3 EUAs, only 1 of them has 16 plus. And our vaccine is safe for all demographics, and we're going to continue to focus on kids. And so that's very important. I think focusing on children, which is very important, and also the variants is the key. So that those are the things I think people have to think very broad-based. How do you protect and how do you minimize viral escape and spread of these variants? I think our ultimate goal should be, how do you control the pandemic? That should be the ultimate goal. Not about coming with boosters and stating it's going to go on for 6 years, 7 years. How do you bring the normal life? That's all everybody has to think through.
Very helpful. Thanks, Shankar. Daniel?
Yeah, maybe I continue with that. I think the mutations are not unexpected, and I think this is the biggest challenge for our industry, to be prepared and to learn and to adapt as early as possible to prevent spread of the mutants, and also to have answers to what's happening if there is a variant which is no longer where our vaccines and drugs are no longer sensitive. So therefore, I think what we need to do is somehow to focus on mechanisms and ways to prevent and to be prepared if something occurs. Usually these things are unpredicted, and they occur somewhere in the world and then spread rapidly, as we have seen now with the 3 forms mentioned. And one remark here on our end, IMU-828 targets a cell-based approach, which is basically totally independent from the viral proteins and spike protein and so forth. So it's really targeting the underlying machinery, how the virus is replicating. And that's the reason why we found that, because it was 828 was found to be active against totally different viruses with this mode of action. So we think that the strength of this concept is really to allow us to be better prepared if things go wrong, and we have a weapon here to defend, to be prepared if things go wrong. So, simple comment.
Thank you. I also like the word weapon, since this is a fight against COVID. And then Jay, comments on your effort.
Yeah, so I think, by the way, Ananta is on Arsenal Street in Massachusetts, which is another good thing to have in this war. So, no, I think many of the vaccines, pretty much all the vaccines, are targeting the spike protein as a very reasonable. It's very rational. You're looking at the viral entry step, so the vaccine's circulating, is just waiting basically for the virus to show up, latches onto the spike, and you can deal with things before before the virus gets into cells and you have an active infection going on. Our approach is obviously therapeutics, right? So we're making the assumption that the vaccine wasn't 100%, or compliance wasn't 100%, or there's a new variant that gets around the vaccine. And so the presumption is we're going to have a patient who's presenting with an ongoing infection, and that there's rapid viral amplification going on, because the virus obviously co-opts the healthy cells and turns them into replication factories. So what we're going after is critical enzyme targets that the virus uses in order to replicate. So these are generally very conserved, not so many mutations going on around the regions that we're targeting, because if they did, they would lose function and would die out. So this is sort of a classic antiviral approach, direct-acting antivirals that we've used successfully against Denanta, hepatitis C for sure, but HIV, you can just go down, flu, on and on and on, going after enzymes that or biochemical targets that the virus takes and uses to replicate. So by targeting replication, you can get the viral loads down, you can stop the shedding. You can hopefully, our goal is ultimately to get to the infection when it's an upper airway infection, if possible, right after you swab and you test, PCR positive, boom, try to get on a drug and stop things when it's upper airway before it gets down and causes cytokine storms and all kinds of things you really don't want to have to get into. So early diagnosis, rapid treatment, and with an agent that is probably going to be less vulnerable to these types of mutations because of the particular drug binding sites that we're targeting.
Perfect. Thanks, Jay. So Daniel, just coming back to you, you talked briefly about your program, but wanted you to talk about it a little bit more. It's very interesting. You have some antiviral, but in some anti-inflammatory aspects of your molecule as well. You've generated some really good data in a sizable, I think, 200-patient COVID study. Can you talk a little bit about the efficacy that you saw? I think what some investors might also be interested in are, additional data around differences in terms of the timing of the use of your drug or background therapies, how that may have influenced some of the outcomes that you saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, to summarize, I think we have seen, as you said, on the one hand, antiviral activity because of the underlying replication mechanism inhibition. On the other hand, we have seen quite nice repression of CRP levels and D-dimer. So these typical more progress inflammatory response linked markers, and also clinical benefit in speeding up clinical improvement over time and time to relief of symptoms. So that's I think all going in the right direction. Part of that, as you said, was also to check whether because it was always treated in the background of current medication, and investigator's choice, basically. We looked on more or less the whole bunch of different things used worldwide, and we have not really seen a difference in the combination versus a no combination. So I think that doesn't make a big difference. But there was a difference if it comes to the timing. So in our trial, clearly, if we start a treatment in the first 8 days after first symptoms occur, I think we have seen substantially more benefit for the patient. So looks like going early is good. However, given that it's not a purely antiviral effect, we don't think that we need to really go to the first or second day after infection. It's really something we see these effects in the first 8 days treatment start after symptoms. So I think that gives us a quite comfortable way to and a period to start treatment.
Perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And then just a follow up here, regarding your data, I thought it was interesting as well, because you guys reported that mortality rates were decreasing. So you weren't able to really show a difference there. And so I was just wondering, what the drivers of that could be, and what are some novel endpoints that you believe might be most suitable for the FDA to consider for these less severe patients or less severe COVID patients that you saw in your study. Also, are these patients actually more likely to leave the hospital early? I think I'm just kind of wondering, what remains the unmet need in these patients? If it's not mortality, what is it? Is it, the fact that, they're still in the hospital longer and they need to leave a little bit sooner, et cetera?
Right. Endpoints are important. And I think what we were a little bit surprised to see that really the mortality rates have dropped so much. But in the 200 patient study, that was a little bit unexpected here. But that's, I think, an experience more or less every company made who started in last late spring, early summer with trials. And because I think the doctors somehow figured out over the summertime how to treat those patients properly. And for example, all the discussions regarding invasive ventilation have more or less gone away over the summertime, because they figured out they really should wait as long as possible to use that. So that was a little bit reflected in the data we have seen. However, we are quite happy to see clinical improvements. And I think I can see a little bit also movement here on the regulatory side, so that they know that we need to have better endpoints, clinical relevant endpoints, which we can use to judge if a drug is helping here. I think from my point of view, or our company point of view, it should be something which is really, for example, showing a very clear clinical benefit, like, for example, relief from hospital, clinical improvement, or relief from symptoms. I think that's all good for the health of the patients, but also for the healthcare system. And one remark here is that these things somehow also correlate with these currently broadly discussed long COVID symptoms, so things which were short breath and fatigue, I think really stay for quite a long time. And I think there are lots of patients affected around the world from this, and it also affects younger patients. So it's nothing really purely for old patients or typical at high risk patients, really more broadly seen now. And I think that's maybe also a point to look at. And we also have seen here in our trials quite a remarkable drop in treatment emergent adverse events of higher severity, which are linked to COVID-19, which is also, I think, a quite relevant clinical observation from this trial.
Thank you, Daniel. So all of you working on, efforts in the fight against COVID, as I mentioned, are really promising. But a question that's really worrying to a lot of folks is, what Jay kind of alluded to. Are we actually going to see this, year over year over year? And I know it's a bit controversial, but I just really wanted you guys to, comment on this, again, beginning with Shankar and then Jay and then Daniel. Is it something that is going to be around for a while, and how should we be thinking about it?
It's a tough question to answer, right? I mean, again, as I mentioned before, when you can vaccinate massive number of people, like 70+% of the population within like really in 3 months, you can get a good control on the pandemic, right? But it's not happening. So it's taken a long time because even the vaccines are very, very complex, very difficult to make. And I think, I mean, the more we do of the vaccinations, the more control you get on controlling. And again, you know, people have to really think about all age groups, all populations, not just adults, right? And if the variants are emerging and the kids are not vaccinated, that's not going to help. And some of them are escaping and some of the vaccines are not effective, then you're playing this catch up on the booster doses, right? And so that's why I think it's really important to think through this and see, you know, if you have a broad stroke, broad spectrum vaccine like ours, you know, which has a very strong humoral and cellular response, I mean, can we vaccinate as many as possible with this and control it? And also it's good for kids. I mean, so I think if we can get the control on that, and how do you manage the vaccination programs in a nice time frame, not like, you know, taking too long, and you can get control of that. What you want to do is develop a herd immunity, and for that you need to get vaccination rates above 70%, and you need to do it in a reasonable time. You cannot take like more than a year to do that. Then these variants develop, they keep escaping, and you're catching. So I think it's not going to. I'm hoping, you know, I'm always hopeful, always have a positive thinking, right? And we're going to conquer this. And it's probably, I mean, I wouldn't believe it'll be like 5-7 years. Probably it's a shorter time frame. In the next few years, I think our goal is to do everything we can and bring the normal life back. And I mean, this is miserable what we are going through. I mean, it's really destroying, you know, especially look at the kids. I mean, it's really so important for them to go back to school. I mean, the colleges, and they're missing that interaction and the life. I mean, this is a life, you know, I mean, that's where they learn, interacting with other kids, and in colleges, interacting with other students, and we're taking that life away from them. This is what it's going through is miserable across the globe. And I think we really have to work hard, really get these vaccinations up, and also think really into the futuristic. What else can we do to control this viral spread?
That was really helpful, Shankar. Appreciate it. And then going on to Jay.
Yeah, I you know, my bet is that it will be an endemic virus that's here, you know, to stay for a while. Hopefully it's reasonably well managed by vaccines, and that hopefully compliance is also reasonable with vaccines, because otherwise you are going to be chasing it. I think it's particularly important right now, you know, to be, you know, globally, not just in places that can afford it, but we should be, you know, focused on global vaccination programs incredibly aggressively. Otherwise, it's going to, you know, sort of undermine the good that the existing vaccines have done, and you're only going to be creating the opportunity for this this virus to get, you know, more contagious or more lethal, or sometimes both. And you also run the risk of spillback, you know, into other hosts that could, you know, start to carry this. There's no advantage whatsoever to dragging out the rate of vaccination, and there's only huge disadvantages. But even with the best of realistic programs on a global basis, I think it's going to be a little bit, you know, hard to eradicate, and it's less likely to just sort of burn out the way the original SARS did. I mean, if it does, that's great. We can all move on and do other things. There's plenty of things in the world to work on, but I'm reasonably fearful that this is just going to be a new one on the list. And you know, hopefully through a combination of whatever frequency vaccinations people need, and therapeutics for you know, for people who escape, for where the virus has escaped either through lack of vaccination or lack of efficacy, we'll be able to manage it, you know, at that end. And the good news is there's lots of diagnostic capabilities now for doing this. I mean, people are very comfortable with testing and the process of doing it. It's getting only simpler and simpler. And so that's how you can really manage this thing, longer term.
Thank you. And then Daniel, your perspective, and we'll count this as the perspective of, what you're seeing as well in Europe.
Well, first of all, it really does look like that this beast is going away. We will somehow face reality that it will stay for quite some time, and we will see different developments. And I'm expecting that I think the vaccines will have a major impact on protecting us and going back to normal life. However, we have so many people which are immunosuppressed. We have so many people who just don't want to be vaccinated or just can't be vaccinated. So there will be a quite substantial number of patients who are at risk. And the question for me is how aggressive those mutant forms really show up and how easy they can really spread around. And so far, this virus seems to be quite unique from what we have seen over the time. And therefore, I think the world needs to take it seriously and need to work on all ends to protect us and to do whatever we can do. And it's our responsibility also as a community here, as biotechnology companies, to support these developments. And it's important to also educate the governments and responsible people that it's nothing which will be over tomorrow and we can go back to normal life. So I think it's a mistake if we do that, because then we are not well prepared.
Thank you. That was really helpful. So speaking about how we can kind of move some of these efforts forward, Shankar, there's been a lot of buzz around your partner's COVID vaccine, which had really impressive phase 3 interim results. So clearly folks would like to know if you have any comments on engagement with the FDA and how you plan to build a case for the FDA to kind of grant an EUA for Covaxin.
So the data is very, very promising. The phase 3 interim, they're at 81%. And once again, we have very strong, early stage, like phase 2 data, right? I mean, with the strong cellular and humoral responses, those are good because it's important to have that broad spectrum antibody response and the longevity, like durability, and clubbing that with that good T cell response, which, is supposed to keep the memory, and when you see different variants and how you attack. And so overall, I think it's important the most important thing is a broad spectrum immunity. So they already, in addition to this phase 3 data, they already released data on the UK variant. That's very important. They actually did the study the way you're supposed to do, not lab engineered, taking actually the strains and look at the neutralizing antibodies and showing there's no difference between compared to Wuhan. Currently, all the vaccine companies developed based on the original clade coming out of Wuhan, and then comparing that with UK strain, and it looks great. And there's no reduction in neutralizing antibodies. So we're based on how it's structured. This vaccine is developed. We believe that's going to continue. They're going to generate more data with the Brazilian strain and South African strain. We're going to get the data in the next few weeks, and we're hopeful, potentially based on how it's providing these responses, cellular and humoral response, we believe it's going to have a good protection and effectively work against those. That's very important. So taking all that and the safety, I mean, they actually have compelling safety coming out of these two. Current vaccines, if you look at the mild to moderate, there's a significant reduction compared to those cases, compared to existing EUAs in the US. I mean, because traditionally these vaccines are safe. It's the same platform how you make pediatric polio vaccine. It's good for all demographics, right? Comorbidities and the pregnant women, all these things we have to consider. So what we are trying to do is take the data they have generated, strong data. It's not only coming out of the phase 3. In fact, we requested our partners, this vaccine has an EUA in India, right? They started mass immunizations. Is there a way we can get a summary of the safety from that, which could be beneficial? So we're waiting for the data, and we need a little more safety data from phase 3, just as other companies which got EUA, we know the instructions. So FDA, again, we have a regulatory path, and we're waiting for the data. As soon as that data comes out, we'll put the whole package together. Our goal is to file the EUA, and sometime late April, sometime in that time frame. And again, that's very important to get all the data together, just as other companies have done. So that's our plan. So if we go with that, and typically, agency takes about 4 weeks based on the recent J&J. And so we'll be in a position to launch this in second quarter this year and start deploying. So that's the plan right now as it stands. We'd like to utilize all the data we get and work with FDA to get the EUA and to start deploying this vaccine in the second quarter. That's our current plan.
Perfect. Thank you, Shankar. That's really helpful. And late April, that's a really nice timing because I feel like 2020 has been going really quickly. So that would be right around the corner. So looking forward to development from that program. And so Jay, sticking with the theme of kind of what's next for your program, can you comment on the progress with your COVID-19 program so far, how you're leveraging your expertise in virology to kind of accelerate efforts, and when can we expect a potential IND from your program?
Yeah, sure. So, we started the program just a bit over a year ago. We weren't behind too many other people, but it was about that time. And, quite honestly, we had sort of ruled out coronaviruses as an interesting area for R&D, only several months before that, just because, the original SARS burned out, and MERS is very regional, and the rest are sort of common cold coronas that you really kind of don't need to treat. But then it raised its head, right? It presented itself, and it fits very well with what we do. So the first thing we did was, we sort of scoured through our existing library of antivirals because we worked on many, many different viruses. Even within each virus, we work on many, many targets, and within each target, we have many, many, chemical series. And so we've got a library, right? And I would say we didn't, and in parallel, because when you're doing library work, it's sort of a high throughput game, and it's not that this all isn't a game of chance, when you're doing discovery work, but you're at the mercy of whether something either serendipitous or just almost good enough comes forward, and then you can tweak it a little bit and get across the line more quickly. But we didn't leave anything to chance on that front. And instead we sort of unpacked the virus and said, where do we think the key vulnerable targets are? Are they druggable targets? Are they druggable targets that we know how to drug? And so on and so forth. And that's where we, in parallel, started focusing on, enzymes like protease and polymerase and some of these things that are household words in antiviral work anyway. And it turns out that approach sort of pulled ahead. So I'd say the screening effort didn't give us anything that was convincingly better than our sort of de novo work. In fact, I'd say it's quite the opposite. And we started making some pretty good progress, on that front. So right now we've got some really potent molecules that have a lot of good drug-like qualities that are in advanced lead optimization, I would say. So, our goal is we're working on several other human respiratory viruses. We've got another program in RSV going after a polymerase, and we've got one going against human metapneumo. They're all roughly at the same stage. And so we've got, different teams sort of doing lead optimization on these things in parallel. And I'm hoping to get a couple of them across the line in terms of drug candidates this year. So which ones there'll be among our viruses, I hope, beyond all hopes that SARS is at the top of that list. But we just need to do the finishing steps to turn the advanced leads that we have into a finalist candidate that would be suitable for, pointing toward the clinic. And so we're hoping this year will be that year.
Thanks, Jay. Really appreciate it. And then Daniel, again, next steps with your COVID-19 program, IMU-838. And then I know you're also doing some biomarker analysis on these patients. So what are you hoping to see, and are the insights that you're likely going to get from that interrogation going to be helpful for your multiple sclerosis and your ulcerative colitis study as well, which is using the same molecule?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I already mentioned that one of the big challenges is that so many people, so many patients around the world with chronic autoimmune and inflammatory disorders, they suffer from virus reactivations and also lack of the ability to be vaccinated. For example, patients with long-term CD20 treatments and potential B-cell repression, these things are a little bit of a challenge for vaccinations. So what we are looking for, and I think we've got a really nice confirmation, is the general antiviral activity of the drug, and also underlining that you can use it, and it's really supportive to use this drug in patients with chronic inflammatory and autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. And just to name two examples, I think JC virus is always a risk of reactivation in MS patients. That's known for quite some time. And also other known infections which may play a role, like EBV or CMV. It's good to know that the drug you take if you have MS is antiviral. So I think that's a good news for patients, and we learned that from this trial as well. And that helps a lot, I think, also for ourselves. It maybe also offers a new window of specific patients who we should maybe focus on in the future also, is patients really which are currently suffering from these indications and need some antiviral treatment. And we can maybe do good in this double strike for those patients.
Thank you, Daniel. And then Shankar, we're going to come back to you. We had you talk about your regulatory path, discussions with the FDA, which was really helpful. I think you mentioned just the robust efficacy that we saw with the drug, potential for use in kids and even in immunocompromised patients. The safety profile has been really good, potential to be used in mutants because you're not just targeting the spike protein, as well as some of the storage advantages. So it's looking really good, as you approach discussions with the FDA for an EUA. But I think another question that we often get is, with your initial focus on ophthalmology, are you well positioned to kind of bring this across the finish line? But you have a lot of expertise in vaccine development. So can you elaborate on that, as well as the expertise of the scientific advisory board that you've kind of put together to kind of spearhead this effort?
Yeah, absolutely. We got a very esteemed scientific advisory board, and there are three top people from University of Pennsylvania, including Susan Weiss, very well known in the coronavirus expert, and David Fagenbaum, one of the top immunologists. So he heads up the cytokine storm lab at UPenn, and he leads the FDA panel as well as the NIH panel for repurposed drugs for that, and also Harvey Rubin, who is a top infectious disease expert. In addition, I used to work at large pharma Pfizer, right? I mean, very actively involved in large vaccines. And then, so I brought a lot of my colleagues, or good experts like Bruce Forrest, who ran most of the global clinical trials for vaccines at Wyeth and Pfizer. And then Satish, who used to be, CSO for biotherapeutics, another top vaccine expert and RNA guy, and Kathy Paycheck. So the SAB is like one layer. Then we got a team of advisors, again, from ex-Pfizer and Merck, vaccine experts. Then we're building a strong internal team. I mean, personally, I spent the majority of my life with significant contributions in the large pharma in vaccines. So I do understand, and it's an enormous amount of effort you need to put into building the infrastructure. And here, again, the first phase of the vaccine launches is it's all about getting the EUA and then manufacturing. I think so. The distribution part and actually commercialization is relatively easier as long as you get government commitments, and they're going to take it and they're distributing it right now. But when you get into the pandemic goes down, then if it continues like annual maintenance mode, and when people go into commercialization, then you need to roll back to traditional vaccine commercialization models. So that has some time to grow as an organization. Ocugen will get that time, and with the vast network we have, I'm confident we'll be ready for it, and we're going to continue to improve our team. Once again, our goal is to focus on the UA and use the data we have, 12 plus age group, get that done, because none of the other US are covering it, and then immediately initiate pediatric studies to expand that label to cover all, daycare and high school and school kids, and also high-risk patients. And also the third one we're thinking right now, because of the broad based immunity, can we use ours as a booster, for people who got other vaccines? So that may be very helpful to control the spread of the virus and pandemic, and also minimize the viral escape. So those are all the things, again, we have to do. We have to still continue to do clinical trials here, and we're going to embark on those, along with, working on the manufacturing and everything else. So this is a huge task, and we are ready. We're going to, we're getting ready for it, and we got a great team, very excited, and they all work 24/7 to contribute to great cause. It's all about saving lives.
Thanks, Shankar. I'm actually going to prod you a bit more, just because you're kind of mentioning, beyond the government purchasing an initial amount, long-term commercialization, because we did talk about, COVID, unfortunately, perhaps been around for a long time. So how are you thinking about, potential stockpiling, or do you anticipate that, it's going to get ordered kind of like the vaccine for the flu, ahead of the season? Is that your anticipation? How that logistics around that going to look? And then secondly, just because, Bharat has also talked about plans for a nasal, a therapy or vaccine. Just kind of wanted to know if you guys will have access to that in terms of bringing it to the US, or you have to start a new agreement, and some of the mechanics of that as people are thinking about the long-term outlook of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one is going to the stockpile. That's very important, right? And in order to, one of the salient features of this vaccine we didn't talk about is a standard refrigerator storage, how traditional vaccines are being stored. And that's a big plus for stockpile. I think it's very difficult to store something for the future for outbreaks. Even if you control the pandemic, you will get outbreaks, right? And for that, CDC always stockpiles vaccines. And having a good refrigerator storage would be ideal. That's what this vaccine is all about. Even for the mass immunizations, they have generated adequate data for, because you're talking about multi-dose vials, and when you open those doses, about 10 to 30% losses because of if you have the, current vaccines, how they're deploying, there's a lot of wastage. So you can prevent all that, you can open it and you can continue to use it for a few days without impacting stability. That'll be a big plus. So I think for stockpile, you need a standard refrigerator storage vaccines, which we can provide. And I think you're absolutely right. Once the curve goes down from pandemic, and the governments are going to secure for future stockpiles in anticipation. The second question, we'll definitely be ready for it, and we'd like to provide our vaccine for huge stockpile. Second thing is the nasal vaccine. Again, we have to see how it evolves. There's another US company also working on it. And once again, we have to look at the data and see what it does. Because most of the vaccines, what is important is getting the humoral response as well as cellular response. And once you have it in the system, I think you get a protection, irrespective of the route of delivery. Obviously, this is a respiratory virus, so having something, in the nasal, you still have to get a broad immunity. Whatever route you take, that's very important. And so we're going to watch that, but I can't comment on it right now on that vaccine with our partner. So.
Oh, no worries at all. And then Daniel, we're just probably going to have you just answer another question here, just regarding, your efforts as well. And then I think one of the things you didn't mention, I think I didn't hear, but one of the things I thought was interesting very early on, you guys mentioned about your data, was potential to kind of alleviate some of the long COVID symptoms. So can you just talk about that? Are you guys still pursuing that effort? Are you going to perhaps pursue an EUA? Just update folks on, what's going on with that. And then since we're wrapping up here a little bit, maybe you can even talk about what's going on with your broader pipeline, as well as some milestones that investors should pay attention to, because, COVID is just a really small part of some of your broader efforts that you are pursuing.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think long COVID, there was an interesting sidetrack on our observations. So we just had a look on fatigue during the end of the program. It's seen a quite tremendous difference between active and control. So I think it needs some really proper thoughts. And I mentioned this is maybe one of the things which will not go away that quickly because people may suffer from this more in the long run. Currently, I think our focus is really on preparing the data for our meetings with the regulatory authorities, FDA, but also some European agencies, so that to make sure we get the right feedback and we get the support we need to get it to the patients as quickly as possible. And I believe that we have a tool which really helps. And the question is, what is the smart way forward? And one of the questions is how easy can you really perform clinical phase 3 trials in this environment, and how is the disease development? And everybody's projecting that with the vaccines, I think patient numbers are going down. Let's see how that develops. A little bit influences our way forward, maybe looking more in a niche or a long COVID or whatever as kind of the high unmet need. We need to follow the unmet need in our strategy to make the best out of what we have here. Maybe to the other drugs we have in development and other programs, I think we are preparing our phase 3 for multiple sclerosis, I think, and once again, antiviral activity is quite helpful there as well, and also strengthening the whole concept in the positioning. We are currently waiting for the 12-week data of our 10 milligram dose cohort 2 to confirm 30 milligram as active dose for phase 3, and then we try to get in front of the FDA for end of phase 2 meeting in May-June timeframe this year. And then if things go right, we can be in the first patient in the third quarter of this year already.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And then Jay, just on your COVID efforts, but also broadly on your pipeline.
Yeah, so again, our COVID efforts are part of a broader strategy in human respiratory viruses. We didn't get into COVID because it was, let me say it the other way. We got into COVID because it was already part of an existing skill set that we were building up, again, starting with respiratory syncytial virus and then human metapneumovirus and now SARS-CoV-2. I think it, where it fits in for us is, there's no question that vaccines are going to have an impact, which is, again, terrific for the world. And, but we're looking for the areas where vaccines aren't going to help. And, to that end, it's sort of not unlike, one of our clinical trials that we run now. If somebody presents and they have respiratory symptoms, they get a nasopharyngeal swab, and that goes into a PCR machine. We were doing this before COVID was a word in our RSV studies. And out of the RT-PCR work, and we get our data, in about a half hour in office. It's either RSV or it's not. If it's not, then we don't worry about it. If it's, for example, influenza A or B, or now we look for COVID to make sure, it's not that, because we don't want to enroll somebody, with COVID in an RSV study. That's not the right thing to do. But the punchline is, when people come in, they've got something. We know they've got something. It's a question of what. And I think, aspirationally, where we would like to go is to, if they present and the test shows it's RSV, they get, one enantidrug. If it turns out that it's human metapneumo, then they get another enantidrug. If it's SARS-CoV-2, we hope to have something for that too. But the paradigm, again, ideally, for patients and for mitigation against variants and every other thing, is early diagnosis and detection, and then rapid treatment. And if you can do those kinds of things, you can manage these sorts of infections and public health issues in a much better way. So that's our general approach. And we're just, for us, SARS is just yet another bug we're going to go after in that in that strategy.
Thanks, Jay. And then Shankar, we talked a lot about your COVID program, but you also have gene therapy platform that you're working on. So just want to give you the opportunity as well to just talk about some of the milestones expected with that and where you guys are at.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is. We're very excited about this. It's a breakthrough gene therapy platform, very unique and a game changer in the ophthalmology space. And one product targeting many inherited retinal diseases or rare diseases. In fact, we got 4 orphan drug designations for our OCU400, and in the US for targeting different genetic mutations. In Europe, actually, we got a broad orphan medicine designation targeting like retinitis pigmentosa, right? And also LCA. So between 2 of them, they got about 175 genes which are mutated, they cover. So with the traditional gene therapy approach, you need to make at least 175 products. And with RP, that only represents, as you know, 60%, remaining 40% are randomized. So if you go with the traditional gene therapy, it's almost impossible to take care of these patients. 2 million patients globally struggle. The majority of them become legally blind by the time they're in 40s, right? So we believe we have great potential to take care of these patients with a single product, okay? Because these are based on the nuclear genes. These are like master genes in the retina. They have ability to regulate, many networks, functional networks, which are responsible from cell development to survival to inflammation. And then they reset homeostasis and restore normal function. So this is a phenomenal a mechanism of action, and we're very excited about it. So our program is going well. The 400, we're planning to take that and file the IND in the second half of this year. It's on target. And there are 2 major things, as you know, preclinical, you have to get the manufacturing done. Gene therapy manufacturing is very complex. I'm happy to announce that it's already done successfully. It's a good size scale, 200 liter scale, it's like a commercial scale. Because of our strong partnership with a large biotech, it's taken care. And the second part is preclinical tox studies that are ongoing. And as soon as we get the chronic tox data, because typically these phase 1 trials go on for 1 year, so you need to submit chronic tox for 6 months. So we're working on it. As soon as that information comes, we'll put the IND, then we'll go into clinical trials with the 2 parallel clinical trials in 2 different mutations. And then that's the plan currently. And then another major program in gene therapy, 410, is moving forward. That's for targeting dry AMD. Dry AMD is a significant unmet medical need. About 10 million patients in the US alone, tens of millions globally, right? Just imagine if we have, 410, we're very upbeat about it, RORA gene, which we believe it's a very complex disease. There are multiple things cause it. There are problems with inflammation, lipid metabolism, oxidative stress, and it's very difficult to target one at a time. Having this another master gene, in 410, we believe would be an answer for this. And just imagine giving a single injection, intravitreal or subretinal, single therapy, taking care of millions of patients globally. This will be phenomenal. What we can do for patients. And we're very excited about that. Again, that's moving well. And our goal is to take that program into the clinic next year.
Okay. So. Thank you, Shankar. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all of our panelists for being here. This has been really engaging. Really appreciate all the insights that you guys provided on the call. Looking forward to following these stories. Thanks to the folks that dialed in as well to listen into the call. We really appreciate it. And with that, this concludes the session, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sagbay.
Bye.